So guys, here I'm back again, and now we're truly gonna start with our series. The latest video was just to show you the initial configuration that we're gonna use to basically have a pretty print, but now we're gonna really jump into it, and I'm gonna first start with the letter S from solid, which means single responsibility principle, and we're gonna see this in practice, see how messed up it is and why you should do this. You should apply this principle to your classes and methods. So if you didn't notice, I have this app file in here inside the source folder. This app file will be just responsible for running our application basically. And I also in here created a new user from this class user, which I also created, and let's see what it does. We have 3 attributes in here, and we have one method, which is store user, which receives also an object from the class user. But great, let's really analyze what's going on in here. As we can see, we have a lot to cover. So first, it's doing, as we can see, 3 validations basically. We are testing the ID. If it's less than 0, we're testing if the name is empty, and also if the email is valid or invalid. So if any of those cases are invalid, we'll throw errors. And by the way, we're just actually printing it, so you should have your logic. You should not have this code, of course. That's just for the sake of examples. And that's what we have. We're just gonna print stuff to simulate what should be happening in this case. So we have 3 validations in here, and if we do succeed those validations, we go to the next sentence in here, which is responsible for storing this user in a database. And of course, as I said before, it's just an example. It's just gonna print into our terminal. After storing this user, we're gonna send an email, and also we're gonna save a log for this user. So as you can see, we're doing a bunch of things here. The name of the function is just store user, but what we are doing inside is actually validation, and later we save this user in a database, which is really the correct thing to do. And later on, we're sending an email and also saving a log for this. Let's see what's really the problem for this code. Let's start with the validation. So besides being bloated, and besides your eyes being able to see all the implementation of this thing, which makes the code confusing, you don't know at first glance what's happening because it's bloated, but you also don't have a really clear understanding of what this function could do, as it's doing just a bunch of things. And not only this, let's see if you would have to, let's say you had to create another function, what you could have. I'm just gonna simulate in here. Let's say you update user, and as you are going to update a user, you're also going to validate the data you're passing. So in this scenario, you would have to copy all of that validation again inside this function, and that would be terrible. You're duplicating your code. You're basically, there is a pattern called dry, which is don't repeat yourself, and that's exactly what you would be doing here. So that's not what we want at all. So we should, of course, group up this validation in a different method. Actually, it's gonna be in a different class, but let's just take care of this function, and later on we're gonna fix this class itself. So I'm gonna group up these 3, and also group up this one and also this one, as I should have more flexibility on this. Let's see, I just want to store in user. That's all I want to do. In this case, I can't do that because I'm always validating, which is correct, but it shouldn't be here. I'm starting this user, but I'm also sending an email and saving this log, and that's not what I want, not at all. Or in another case, let's say inside this application, we have a certain we have, let's say we need to send an email to another user. In this case, I can't have this. I don't have access to this if I don't store an user, which is terrifying. I should be able to send an email by my application, and also I'm saving a log for it. And let's say I want to save the log for an update. I'm going to have to duplicate this code again and again and again. Let's say we have different classes, and you can see that this thing is just going to accumulate over time and it will become very complex to maintain. So just give me a second. I'm going to fix this and show you a better and more cleaner way to present this logic. So guys, here I'm back, and I'm going to explain to you what I did here to make this code way more flexible, but just have that in mind that I'm still validating the single responsibility principle in this case, but I had to make these adjustments so you can see how we're going to progress into not violating the principle and letting our code really well written and really reusable and flexible. So as you remember, I had a bunch of validation in here. Now I have only one if, and it validates this data. If it's not valid, we will return some error and die in here in this case. And if it passes in here, we're gonna start this user, and after send an email and save the log. So it's doing exactly what it was doing before, but what I did here is create different methods, and each of one of these three they have only one responsibility. So it's validating that data from the user, it's sending an email, and it also saving a log. And by the way, this one in here should have a second argument, should be in a string message, to make this message dynamic and flexible. So that's what we have in here. Send an email, and we're gonna say that you've created your account successfully. Okay, I'm not sure how this is spelled. I suppose that's the way it is. Okay, so I changed here. So as you can see, it was hard-coded. This message was just hard-coded in here. It wasn't flexible at all. I couldn't send any other type of message in here. Now I can. And I basically organized this code so these three methods are really respecting single responsibility, but the initial one, which is the store user, it's not. But as you can see, let's run this app, and before that, let me explain to you what's happening here. So I have an instance of this class I created and using in here. I set the ID to 1, the name to John Doe, the email to test@gmail.com, and here I'm calling store user. And by calling this, if the data is valid, we should bypass this, store this using the DB, and send an email, and also save the log if everything goes right. So we should have 3 messages in our terminal. Let's see what's gonna happen. So I'm already into the source folder, and I have to source root actually. So PHP app PHP. Okay, let's run and let's see the results. So I created the user successfully, where we have the ID 1, name John Doe, and email test@gmail.com. Great. Right after we were able to send an email to the exact same email that the object was created, message, a dynamic message as I showed you before, and also we saved the log for this user. Great, at least it's working. But now let's really refactor this, because as you will notice, coding your first code is always a draft, and maybe your second one is also a draft, but you should refactor this. You should get into this process of really enjoying refactoring your code, so it will become way more flexible and way more reusable, and you will see that will improve a lot. So in this case, this method is still violating this principle. And not only this, the class itself, the user class, is also violating the principle. Why? Because the user class stores in user, which is great, but it's also validating the data. It's also sending an email and also saving a log. So let's say somewhere else in my application I want to send an email, and by having this email pretty much strongly linked to this class, I can't send an email if I do not instantiate an user. So I always have to have an instance of an user to be able to send an email, or to be able to save a log, or to be able to validate data. And that should not happen, not at all. This code is completely unflexible and is validating the single responsibility, because this class should not be responsible for those actions like validation, email sending, and also saving logs. So we're gonna have to refactor this and really solve all these problems and make this class finally, and not only this class, because I'll have to create more classes, and really make all classes respecting solid principles, at least the first one, which is single responsibility. So I'll fix this and I'll come in a minute to explain to you what I did. So here I'm back once again, and let's analyze what I changed in this code and how I made this way more flexible and way more readable and reusable. So let's see. Here, if you remember, I had a bunch of logic that should not be responsible for, that this function should not be responsible for. So here I just put the logic that is responsible for storing user in a database, and the class itself has only methods that are related to the user. And by doing this, I had to create three other classes. So let me show you the first one, which is, if you remember, we had to send an email after creating a user in that case. So I separated that function in a different class called email sender with a function called send email. And if you can, as you can see, this email sender class is only responsible for email, which is great. I also separated the validation logic inside a validator class, and we have only one method that validates data. So the validation takes care only of the validation. The validator class takes care only of validation of data. Great. And later we have this log class, which is responsible for saving a log. As you can see, now we are truly respecting the single responsibility principle, in which the class user stores only takes care of user, and the store user method is only storing in user. We don't have to do anything other than that. We're just having a single responsibility for this method. The validator, as I said, only validates data. The email only sends email, and the log only saves logs. So that's what we should be looking for when developing our applications. And by that, it's not gonna work the way it is, because it's not connected. We're not running anymore all those methods. We were running just store user. So in this case, we will have to basically import those classes in here, and we're gonna do this by user use send email sender. Yeah, that's it. And also use validator, and also use log. Great. Now we have imported, and we have to instantiate every single one of these classes. Let me just pause a bit so we can save some time. Okay, here I'm back again, and now I have created objects for each and every class that I created before. And great, but we only still have in here the store use method. The problem is that we don't have any more logic in here. That is not what we wanted before. We wanted a validation email and all sorts of things that were inside this store user. But now we don't have it, but we have to rebuild that logic in here. So if you remember, the first thing that was done inside that function was to validate data. Now we have a class for this. We have a method for this, which is this validator and this validate data. Now we are validating the data. If it's not valid, the program will show us. So let's run this, clear PHP app, and the user is stored correctly. But let's make it fail. Let's remove this @ from the email, and it should fail and show us a message. Okay, great. It's showing us that the email provided is not valid, therefore it cannot create the user and store into the database. Great. Let's just make it work now. And before that, we were sending an email. We created an object for this and also a method to send email, and we are going to pass, in this case, we're going to pass just the email, not the entire object. So we can make this extremely flexible. And if I also remember, we had a second parameter in here, which is the message. So yes, congrats for creating a new account. Let's just put some message here just for the sake of this example. And later we also had to save a log for this user, and we were passing just the ID, if I'm sure. So that's it. That's pretty much the logic that we had inside that function that was completely bloated. And as you can see now, each and every class takes care only of the same idea, only the same entity. So the user takes care of the user, validator, validation, email for email, and log for logs. So we have not only organized our code, but we made it way much more flexible and only responsible for one thing. And by that, let's just test this email in this case, and we don't even have to create an object for that because we made it so flexible and so dynamic that I could in fact pass in here. Let's try another one. Let's say gmail@gmail.com, and that should work even if we don't have an user object. In this case, let's say inside our app we could send email to anyone, not just the people inside there in the database, but we could be able to send anything, any email from any kind of email outside the application. In this case, we could perfectly do that by organizing this way. As you can see here, an email has been sent to gmail@gmail.com, and the message, congrats for creating a new account. So our code is way flexible and it's working just as we expected. And I guess that's it for today, guys. We covered a lot in here. We covered the Solidity principle. We made our classes responsible for the same entities. We only take care of users in this class, and the method itself only does one thing, and we repeated it for every single class we created. Therefore, we are now respecting the single responsibility principle, and we've successfully applied it to our classes. That's it for today, guys, and see you in the next video.